Yellow Eswatini. Welcome to another episode of the Future of Business podcast, proudly brought to you by M10 Business. This is a platform where we discuss very important issues that are touching on businesses in the tech world and pertaining to how we conduct business in this day and age. And I'm your host, Nombendula Shongwe. Today on the show, we've got Seputile Mhlongo, an economist who is currently the manager, financial regulation and supervision at Digital Frontiers. Welcome to the show, Sepu.
Thanks, Nombendula.
So basically today we're going to talk more about the economic situation, the economic climate, and we're hoping that we can use some of your expertise to touch on some of the issues that are affecting businesses, especially SMEs. So maybe to start with, maybe you can comment a bit on, we've all seen the impact, of, first of all, we've had COVID before, and then here we are now in an even more tough economic climate where we've seen petrol prices rising daily and even affecting our commodities like bread. Cooking oil has been the most popular, coming from 40 emalangeni to 120, all of that. So maybe just touch a bit about what is currently happening and what's been your experience on that, and what's the economic outlook going to be like for the next couple of years?
I would maybe start off by greeting you properly.
Right.
Hello, and hello Eswatini. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here with you. Maybe to start off on a personal level, I agree with you that there's been a rapid increase in recent times of all commodities, or most commodities, and we've seen that I've personally seen it in my grocery shopping list, where my budget every month I have to spend more than what I had budgeted in the previous month. So yeah, that is the current climate that we're in. But maybe to take a step back and look at where we're coming from, which is recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic that had started in 2020. I think a lot of us were, at the end of last year, a lot of us were optimistic, and perhaps still are in many ways.
Right.
Because we now have COVID-19 vaccines that have been rolled out in all of our countries, all over the globe, with a fairly high uptake of the vaccine, which has led to countries reopening their borders, and trade starting to increase as well. So the ability for people to move around, the ability for people to spend money and make money has improved. So I'd say that at the end of 2021, I believe the outlook was positive. The economic outlook was positive, recovering from COVID-19. However, what we did not anticipate was what happened at the start of this year, which was when Russia invaded Ukraine. And that is what has led to fuel prices increasing and shooting up all over commodity prices and all of that. So, yeah.
Thanks. I think, the Russian-Ukraine war definitely took a spin on everything. I think I remember last year, even towards maybe the second quarter of the year, everyone was really looking forward to the regulations being loosened up a little bit and an economy opening up. But obviously now we've seen worse, most likely. I would say maybe we're in a worse situation than the COVID times, mostly because I think, yes, there were rising in prices during COVID, but this has been even worse. If you take that, for example, that I made, if you look at your groceries, yes, there was increase back in 2020, 2021, and now we're seeing a build up on all of that. So obviously it's putting a lot of pressure, both on the consumers, but more especially on the businesses. And I think if you look at the different scales of businesses, you did mention maybe that all of that, in terms of restrictions, it could have affected different businesses at a different scale. So maybe let's share the impact. You can share with us the impact that the pandemic and the build-up of the inflation coming from the Russian war, all of this, I think it has a ripple effect. And maybe just outline that impact on the businesses.
I think the impact has been uneven, at least on the COVID-19 front, right? Where you'd find that businesses that were able to adapt quickly to the digital space or take advantage of the digital space were able to adapt and transform their business processes to fit the context of COVID-19. So I'll give an example. If you owned a butchery in 2020, well, once the strict lockdown was loosened.
During the pandemic.
Yeah, during the pandemic, right? If you owned a butchery, you were able to set up a social media account and advertise your products through social media, right? However, if you owned a mechanic shop where you're fixing cars, if people are not moving, cars are not breaking down, and you're not making an income, you're not earning as much money, or cars are not breaking down at the same level. So there's very little that you can do to take advantage of digital transformation or of the digital space in that context. So I would say that the impact of the pandemic was uneven on businesses. Those that were able to transition to the digital space were able to weather the storm, whereas not all businesses had the same, not all businesses have a similar business model and were able to weather the storm in similar ways.
All right. So I think what you're highlighting is the importance of also, yes, we are encouraging businesses to go digital. I think in the case of the mechanic, maybe the best way that they could do is having online orders. But however, there's still a physical contact that's required. Unlike if you have to go order meat, instead of going to the actual butcher, then you can just get it delivered in your house. I think also the other industry that is similar to the mechanic situation would be your hairdressers. Because, I mean, there's no way to take the salon situation out of the context of physical touch. But maybe the next level could be placing those orders online or booking appointments online, having to come to people's houses. So I think, yes, I do understand that complexity and all of that. So maybe let's think about, what can you say? You've touched on social media in terms of how can businesses take advantage of that economic, in terms of digital economy. So what's the role as we move into that? What's the role of the digital space, growing the economy? How do businesses stay afloat in the midst of all of this? Are there efficiencies that could be gained by being digital versus your traditional brick and mortar business?
Is this for businesses or for other stakeholders?
I think let's maybe start small part on the businesses, then we can move into the stakeholders and the regulators and everybody.
Okay. So your question is, what is the role of?
So what's the role of digital, and how can the businesses take advantage of that in terms of, in this economic situation, how can digital come and be a solution to kind of be a remedy in the toughness?
Okay. Maybe to clarify a few things. So in the economic situation where we have a pandemic and we're not able to move as freely as before, or even after, like we're transitioning to a new normal. Instead of strictly going to work every day, there's now hybrid. There's work from home and there's so many other opportunities. But then we also have the different economic situation, which is the inflation. And I don't know if there's a digital solution to that as yet. But in terms of like learning, taking lessons from the pandemic and how businesses can take that forward, it's definitely establishing some sort of online presence. There's a need for that, finding not so much an online presence, but going where the people are. And if people are online, that's where you want to position yourself, and that's how you want to position yourself. And then moving on to other stakeholders, there are a lot of stakeholders that are involved in this. So we've mentioned social media as a means to attract clients, or clients or customers. There's also a need to transform the way we make payments. If I'm not leaving my house, I will most likely not have cash on me. So we need more convenient ways to make payments, and that's a different stakeholder or different sets of stakeholders that need to come in and introduce that solution or innovate around that space. How do you make payments easier? How do you facilitate easier payments across different payment modes? So using your phone or using a bank or whichever way, wherever you keep your money. How do we transform payments so that we are aligning with the transformation in how we do business or
and
how
fitting
businesses.
into the requirement, especially of the consumer.
Yes.
If they're already at home.
Yeah.
And I think you're touching on that one for. If you look at the context of Eswatini, we've seen maybe a couple of years we're celebrating 10 years of Momo, and you look at the growth of Momo across, and even now we've got e-gov payments, and you're able to pay without necessarily going there. Maybe the last step would be a delivery of whatever you needed, but those payments and mobile money, you know, I think when it comes to that, there's still, yes, much ground to be covered, but I think when you look at the population of how it's easy to talk about your e-payments of some sort, you know, but definitely the integration of the services, there's still more that we'll see in healthcare. I think mostly in healthcare, that's where I've noted that there's still maybe some huge gaps where you can't go to the clinic and just pay with Momo. You still need some form of logical process that involves cash and all of that. So yes, definitely. And then how about you, regulators and other stakeholders that would be involved in that process?
From a regulatory point of view, or from a government point of view, there's obviously the need to create an enabling environment, and government or policymakers or regulators do that through the laws that are enacted and the regulations to enable an environment that facilitates innovation, that enables innovation rather. And so that is the key role that governments need to play in creating an enabling environment for businesses to thrive, for innovation to thrive. There are a lot of, in the context of Eswatini, there are a few things that have come up that would fall under that. But the challenge with regulation in most cases, or with the laws in most cases, is they take so long to be enacted, right? The drafting process takes so long. So by the time policy catches up, there's already a new innovation that needs to be regulated for. So there's also a need for policymakers and regulators to adapt to that and not to wait for a law that will pass for a payment system that existed a decade ago, you know, today, but to create ways to facilitate ways that are ensuring that there's constant regulation, there's constant innovation that is being regulated, that innovation is being regulated. And some of these include things like an innovation hub or a regulatory hub of sorts, but those are limited to whoever is incubated in that space. But yeah.
Sure. And I'm thinking about innovation, I'm thinking of patents and that enabling environment where people can actually know that whatever they've innovated they can reserve the rights and not have to worry about maybe copying and all of that, and feeling like the environment is not enabling and there's no legal boundaries around that. So maybe now I want us to just go back to the discussion around ICT. As we talk about ICT and the businesses, maybe let's talk about the role of ICT as a whole in the economic growth agenda. As we see where we are right now, definitely there's need to reactivate the economy, and we've seen retrenchments in some instances, but how can ICT come through, or what's the role of ICT in reviving economic growth and driving that?
Okay. So before I answer that, maybe I'll take a step back to touch on something else that governments can do, which is capacity building, right? So investing in the capacity building. And I know our government is doing that through the education, so the undergraduate list of scarce skills that they're looking to sponsor are more in the STEM side. So those are also some things that need to go in tandem with regulation and to create as part of creating an enabling environment. And then to come back to your question in terms of what is the role of ICT in the economy, in economic development.
Yeah, for economic growth, basically. Okay. What role does ICT have to play in the whole, especially the growth agenda? Because I think when you're in this situation, a tough situation, the government or everybody is trying to grow and not go further down. So maybe let's talk more about what role can ICT play in that?